Welcome, everyone, to the continuation of the Associa Gulf Coast Education Series, where our goal is to ensure that you, the board, and you, the community manager, are given as much information as possible to continue to make the best decisions possible for your associations. Part of what we talk about today, we're going to bring in somebody new, and we're going to talk about, get ready for it, trees. We're going to talk about tree planting and tree management. John Snow from Platinum Tree Management is our featured guest today. So John, welcome to the show, if you will. If I could ask you to kind of please not only introduce yourself, but what it is and what you do.
Sure thing. Thanks, Paul. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today. You know, I am a board certified master arborist. I've been doing this for 26 years. My focus in that time has primarily been working with townhome, condo, and HOA communities. And basically what we do here at Platinum Tree Management is we're not a tree service. We actually help communities by developing management plans for them so that they have a better understanding of the trees needs, and the specific specifications that they may need in order to properly care for their trees.
Now, you bring up an interesting point when you say you're not a tree service, you do a tree plan. And there's going to be obviously some confusion there as to what is a tree plan. And we're going to get there in a second. But one thing I want to touch on beforehand is trees are actual assets for an association. It's not something that you think of every day. It's not your parking lot. It's not the clubhouse building. It's not the roof or the paint or the pavement that we normally have in our reserve studies that we're saving money for. Even your pool in that example. But trees have the opportunity to be a significant portion of planning when it comes to a projected expense of tree removal. So it's a significant piece that I just want to touch on. How do you look at trees? Do you agree with me that you consider them an asset for an association?
Paul, you hit the nail right on the head. And that's really kind of fundamental to what we do here at Platinum Tree Management. You talk about the reserves and doing like reserve studies for the pool components, the painting, the roofs, the whatever the infrastructure is in the community. And that's a very well-known thing. Oftentimes, though, trees are not counted in that, or if they are, it's just very, very minimal. And trees actually have a huge impact on a community. You know, we were out in a community just the other day looking at it, and you know, when we were estimating the overall values, it was well over $3 million because just in trees, absolutely. And when you start to put it in that kind of a context, you know, we can again really kind of like we have here on the slide, kind of change the conversation, because people don't understand, you know, trees can be a really good asset to the community, but they can also be a liability. And that's why it's so important to do good management planning. It's not something that's an easy thing, but it's a very, very important thing. No, that's absolutely it in a nutshell. I mean, you can look at the slide here, you know, is it an afterthought or an asset? We have the two pictures here on the left. Those were afterthoughts. And then we have the two trees here on the right that are just, you know, beautiful, gorgeous live oaks out in communities that have been well maintained. And so, you know, proper care of the trees can enhance the property, actually improve property values, which that's very important to the community. But then on top of that, you have all the safety issues that come along with it. And, you know, as you see in the first two slides, those were trees that probably should have been removed prior. And what we do is we specialize in trying to identify these problem trees and prioritize that and present that to the board in a way that's very understandable, that they can go and make some good informed decisions.
I think one thing to look at from the board member's perspective is, and I'm talking directly to you, Mr. and Mrs. Board Member, right now, somewhere in your association is probably a marquee tree or a marquee monument, something to that effect that people can physically see. They can drive up through the association, and in some cases they might look at that big flowering tree that, you know, has a bench underneath it, and you could look at it and go, ooh, that's beautiful, that's nice, I like that. And at the exact same time, if the footprint of trees or the landscape of trees is dying, the palm trees look terrible with the front, all that stuff that just doesn't look right. As great as a gorgeous looking tree can benefit you, a bad looking tree or clump of trees, if you will, can be a deterrent. And that just would show any prospective buyers into that association that it might be, hey, if the trees look like this, what else is the association potentially not doing? Is that a fair way to kind of look at this, John?
You're absolutely correct there, Paul. You know, I've talked to residents in a number of communities, and, you know, they've told me flat out, you know, hey, I moved into this community because of the trees. And I actually had a lady said, you know, they cut down my tree, I'm moving. And I mean, people do get attached to their trees, and that's a good thing. You know, I kind of asked, you know, hey, what kind of tree did you have when you grew up in your backyard or front yard? And a lot of people have a special tree that they're fond of. They remember climbing up this tree or swinging from its branches or what have you. And so people do have an emotional attachment to the trees. But that's not really what this is all about. This is about, number one, improving the trees, identifying the problem trees, making good decisions. And, you know, in order to do that, you have to look at the trees as a whole. You can't look at it just as, you know, one tree in front of the building and let's walk around to the back and look at the couple trees there. That's really becomes more reactive management. What we're talking about here, Paul, is really proactive management, where we go in and we look at the bigger picture. We look at the whole community of the trees and identify everything that's out there and prioritize everything.
So let's talk about I'm going to use the phrase prioritizing trees, although it might sound kind of out of sorts in the day-to-day operations of associations. Mm-hmm. When community managers and certainly when board members are out and about walking their properties, as everybody does, whether the manager is out there once a week, once a month, or they might be there on site every day, or right. The board member who's walking their dog, or just getting their steps in, so to speak, we're all looking at certain things. And when we walk by trees, can you kind of walk me through, is there anything that, whether it's a manager or a board member, is there anything that we should be kind of on the lookout for, or some sort of a trigger that might say, hey, something might be wrong with that tree or something doesn't look right about it? Is there anything that we should be looking for before we get into the whole scope of the entire association's plan? If I'm just walking down the street and I look at a tree and go, ooh, something doesn't look right, is there anything in particular I might need to be looking for?
Absolutely. And there's a number of different things, you know, and you know, this is the reason why, you know, professional arborists like myself, you know, we have gone through an extensive amount of training and practical experience to kind of identify these things, because some of the things aren't necessarily real evident to your average person. But I think most people can pretty well identify, you know, hey, if you have a large cavity in a tree or in a limb, that could be a potential problem. You know, if there are you have a very narrow branch union where it makes tight V type of structure, that can be very prone to breaking out in winds. Mechanically, the trees just aren't designed to handle that kind of load with that branching structure. It could be surface roots that are heaving up the driveway or sidewalk and creating a trip and fall hazard. That's something that I see all the time in communities.
Sure.
And there are some things that we can do with that, but some things that we can't. There's a lot of different things. Another big one would be large pieces of dead wood, or if you see the tops of the trees dying back. What most people don't understand is that trees really, typically they die from the top down.
Interesting.
That's kind of it in a nutshell.
So let's talk a little bit about a plan. Now, you alluded to it earlier at the beginning, where it's kind of like an equivalent to a reserve study, where the reserve study that we all might know and understand is dealing with the pavement and the paint and the roof and those types of things, your pool, significant dollar expenditures. But a tree management plan, to look at the slide, is an afterthought. It's something that I believe that most managers and most board members, they're not really thinking about trees until something happens. And that something happening is a tree falls over, destroys a car. A storm comes in and knocks a tree down. There's a reason we start looking at trees instead of being proactive and creating a plan. So can you walk me through a little bit more in depth about not only what a tree management plan is in general, but how does Platinum's tree management system, how is that going to truly help the manager and by extension the board of directors?
Absolutely. The key is, like I said, is we take kind of a big picture view. We look at the whole community. On a typical condo or townhome or HOA, what we're going to do is we're going to go in and basically inventory each of the trees. In some communities that may vary. If there's like some common space that's like way off in like the back 40, kind of like, I was just looking at a property where there's a conservation easement. We're not going to necessarily go out into the marsh and inventory those trees, because obviously there's nothing that can really be done in those kind of areas, or shouldn't be done.
Right. Yeah, definitely shouldn't be done.
Should not be done. The community that I was at, unfortunately, some had, and that becomes an issue. That's part of the reason why we were there. But
of course,
what we want to do is identify all the trees, and what we do when we do the inventory, that's actually, the trees are GPS located, and we actually plug that into a map, and we gather anywhere between 35 and 50 pieces of data on each individual tree. We take a photo of each tree, and that gets attached with that file. And then what we'll do is we will go through when we get back into the office after the entire inventory process is completed, and then we'll go in and start analyzing all that data. And then another important thing that we do that is I feel very important, and I think you'll appreciate this, Paul, is we actually go out and we will do video of each building, and the trees around each building to kind of get kind of that baseline level. This is where we are right now. And so between having the pictures and the video, we have that ability to, over time, kind of begin to see some of the changes. And then we have kind of a multi-layered filtering process that we use that actually will really help to identify and narrow down any particular work, and the goal is obviously that there's not a whole lot of work that needs to be done. And that kind of leads into a little side thought that I have. I see a lot of work out in communities that work has been done that doesn't necessarily need to be done, and is actually detrimental to the trees long haul.
John, is it fair to say that work is being done, using that as the example, that work is being done that probably doesn't need to be done, not because people are, being taken advantage of. It's just that they just don't know what should or shouldn't be done about a certain group of trees.
You're absolutely correct, Paul. And I'm not, trying to, say that people are getting taken advantage of or anything like that. I'm definitely not saying that. It's just oftentimes, you have people that don't understand trees, that are directing the work, and then they're hiring a contractor to come in, and that contractor is going to do what they're told to do, unfortunately. And
right.
A huge part of what we do is really trying to help educate board members and property managers so that they understand, what should and shouldn't be done and the ramifications of those things in the long haul. Just to throw this out as a general rule of thumb, what I recommend is don't prune anything unless it needs to be pruned, anything bigger than about 4 inches in diameter, because you're actually wounding that tree. And what people don't understand is trees don't heal those wounds over, Paul. They seal them over. And on a larger wound, say a 10-inch diameter cut, the tree just can't seal that wound over before decay begins to set in. And so I see a lot of communities where they've gone in, and a lot of times, because it's easier, they will just remove the bottom limbs from the trees, and that's taking out these big 10, 12-inch limbs. And as time goes on, the trees end up rotting out right at the trunk. So what ends up happening is, sure, we did some pruning out in the community, and now the trees aren't on the roof and this and that. But now in 10 years, 5 to 10 years, decay has set in, and now the tree needs to be removed, which is going to be 10 times the cost of doing some routine minimal pruning to meet certain standards. And there are actually standards out there that we use, the ISA standards.
Well, you actually have, you're bringing up an interesting point about cost. And I think for those of us who've been here in Florida since when I say Florida, I'm talking the Tampa, St. Petersburg market, who were here when Hurricane Irma hit recently, 3 years ago, the cost to remove an already downed tree, I think, really took some people by surprise. Now, granted, it was because of a hurricane, and in most cases, insurance took care of it to a certain extent. It will cost more to take care of a dead tree the longer you wait. Is that fair? Meaning you want to take care of the healthy tree now because it's going to cost less. But if you wait until that thing dies, it's just going to cost more to get rid of it. And that's not even including any concrete pavement, any heaving, any resod of grass area when that tree is actually gone. So I want to turn this conversation into the hurricane scenarios, because right now, as we're recording this in August of 2020, we're in the thick of hurricane season. And unfortunately, right now, there's a hurricane going towards the Houston area that's causing devastation. But that triggers us to be thinking about what's going on for our hurricane planning for our own associations, our own personal homes and our personal associations that we live in. So can you walk us through a little bit about when it comes to hurricanes? Now, don't get me wrong, we're already in hurricane season, and a lot of the planning for hurricane season should have already been done. But what is it that we can be cautious of or looking for literally right now today that might help us down the road in the event that a hurricane actually hits to the point where it's taking trees out?
Probably the first and foremost thing would be a dead tree. Okay, if there's a dead tree in the community, need to be thinking about addressing that, particularly where there's, what we call a target. In other words, if it's by the park, if somebody could be walking their dog, or a child could be in that vicinity of that dead tree, then it needs to be removed. If it's near a home, if it could fall and hit a home, then we need to be thinking about that. Then the next thing would be looking at like dead wood or defects within the trees. And again, a lot of these things aren't necessarily evident. You know, it takes years of training and experience really to, you know, look at these trees and really understand what all the defects are and everything. And, you know, it's not something that you can just read a book. It's not something that you can just go out and learn overnight. It's literally years of experience. And I would like to think that I'm very good at it, but I'm always still constantly learning as well. And that's just part of the whole process.
Exactly. But that being said, I'm going to use you as the example of tools in the toolbox. The idea that board members believe in some cases that the manager should be the expert in everything. And I believe our team here at Associa Gulf Coast is very confident in saying we don't know it all. But quite frankly, we shouldn't know it all to exactly what you're talking about. When it comes to trees, there's so much that we don't know. You need to bring in a specialist. I might look at a tree and go, it's ugly or it should be removed, but from your perspective, it's healthy and it's fine, right? So we're looking at the same tree from two different directions. So John, I really do appreciate, yeah, absolutely. So you've given us a lot of information, a lot of food for thought, a lot of stuff that, quite frankly, I hope for those listening and watching this, I hope those individuals who are listening and watching have begun to think a little bit about their trees. It sounds strange to think about trees, but darn it, it is an asset for the association. It can help with the property value, and at the same time, it can hurt the property value. So that being said, John, for those who might be not looking at the computer screen right now, what is the best way or most convenient way for a unit owner, a board member, or a community manager who has questions and certainly wants to discuss utilizing Platinum Tree Management for a tree management plan? What's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Well, we have a number of different ways that they can reach out to us. They can visit our website, platinumtreemanagement.com. Very simple. They can also email me directly. My email is johns@platinumtreemanagement.com. And I can also be reached on the phone at 727-888-7861.
Well, John, really do appreciate your time today and your expertise. You're giving us a lot of good stuff to think about. Again, continuing the educational series to give our boards, to give our managers more information, not less. Get them thinking. We're into budget season now. We've got to start budgeting not only for your pool, not only for your roof, but darn it, start thinking about budgeting some monies for your trees, because eventually you're going to need to do it at some point, whether it's this year or next or 5 years from now. It certainly helps to start thinking about it now. John, again, really do appreciate your time. Thank you very much, and much continued success for you.
Thank you so much, Paul. You have a wonderful day.